All this year, Donald Trump has been saying that he's stopped so many wars, he deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. Not many people have agreed with him. And tonight, thankfully, the Nobel Prize Committee did not give him the prize. The Nobel Peace Prize has been controversial since its foundation, especially the prizes that have gone to American politicians, and there have been a lot of them. Quite a few American presidents have won the Nobel Peace Prize. But the two greatest scandals in the Nobel Peace Prize history are not the prizes that went to people who were perhaps not deserving of the prize. It is the prizes that were not awarded to people who really did deserve the prize. Mahatma Gandhi, of course, is the best known of those who was overlooked by the Nobel Committee, and a great Burmese diplomat who you may never have heard of, but now is a great time to rediscover his story. The Peace Prize dates from Alfred Nobel's bequest. Nobel was the man who discovered dynamite. He used his fortune to endow the Nobel Prizes, including the Peace Prize. And it has been awarded since 1901 for, quote, the person who has done the most or the best work for the brotherhood of nations and the abolishment or reduction of standing armies, as well as for the establishment and spread of peace congresses. I think probably someone would arrest Alfred Nobel for suggesting such things in today's NATO countries. Nobel was an odd misanthrope who looked for a way through his bequest to redeem his idealistic visions. The Nobel Literature Prize is dedicated to idealism in literature. He was inspired in making the Peace Prize by a woman, Bertha von Suttner, originally Countess Kinsky, an Austrian aristocrat who was a writer, a peace activist, and who wrote in 1889, "Lay down your arms." And in 1905, she in fact received the Nobel Peace Prize herself after Nobel's death for her work advocating peace and peace congresses. Unlike the other Nobels, like the Literature Prize, the Peace Prize is awarded by Norwegian politicians, not by the Swedish Academy. And it is a committee largely of politicians. There have been a few changes over the years rather than real experts, although these days they are supported by a secretary who does have genuine expertise in the work of peace. But at the time that Alfred Nobel created the Nobel Peace Prize, Norway itself was not an independent state. It was part of Sweden until 1905. Yet its greatest poet won the Nobel Literature Prize in 1903, and of course it got to bestow a Peace Prize from 1901. Why did he choose Norway? Well, it was not an aggressive nation at that point. It was an unaligned nation, perhaps a genuine force for peace in the New World when European empires still dominated the world. But over the course of the century, the 20th century, the Peace Prize became a tool for Norwegian soft power and a way of expressing its shifting moods to the dominant powers in the world, particularly Britain, after World War I and the United States of America after World War II. And some of the most controversial choices in the Nobel Peace Prize's history have, in fact, long before Donald Trump, been American presidents. Perhaps I should also say, and soon before Donald Trump, because, of course, Barack Obama's Nobel Peace Prize both angers Donald Trump, unleashes the resentment in Donald Trump, and also was in itself quite controversial. There have been quite a few Americans and American politicians who have won the Nobel Peace Prize. And through the Peace Prize, Norway has flattered, fawned on, and at times spurned or rebuffed American power. In 1906, Teddy Roosevelt, despite his machismo, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, I think, for negotiating a peace agreement between Russia and Japan in the Pacific. In 1912, another American, Elihu Root, won the Nobel Peace Prize for rather ignoble purposes. Woodrow Wilson won the Peace Prize for the Peace of Versailles, which many attribute to be one of the causes of World War II. In 1925, a Vice President of the United States won the Peace Prize, Charles G. Dawes, for a not terribly enduring nor terribly successful economic rescue plan in Germany. In 1929, Frank B. Kellogg, no relation to General Keith Kellogg or the Kellogg cornflakes family, a genuine non-oligarchical Kellogg, Frank B. Kellogg won a Peace Prize for a plan for permanent peace which barely lasted a year or two. And in 1945, Cordell Hull, the American, I think, Secretary of State, won the Peace Prize. In 1953, the former Secretary of War, George Marshall, architect, or at least figurehead of the Marshall Plan, won the Peace Prize, I think, in the same year that Winston Churchill also won the Literature Prize. So the Nobel Committee was really doubling down on the Anglo-American alliance in that year. And very controversially, the man many regard as an appalling dark soul and war criminal, Henry Kissinger, won the Nobel Prize together with Le Duc Tho. There have also been snubs by the Nobel Peace Committee to American politicians and to American power. It hasn't all been one way, although the Nobel Committee has in some ways decided or tried to exert Norway's soft power by expressing preferences for one or other style of American foreign policy. And this particularly took off in the 21st century after, I guess, Europe began to get a little bit annoyed with the American unipolar moment, and in particular with the War on Terror and the disastrous wars in interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan. In 2002, the former president, out of office for 20 plus years at that point, Jimmy Carter, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, which many people, including the author of an excellent book on the Nobel Peace Prize, Una Turrentini, describe as a snub to then President Bush. In 2005, Mohammed El-Baradei of the International Atomic Energy Authority was awarded the Peace Prize, again in an act that was interpreted as a snub to America's campaigns, somewhat odd campaigns on weapons of mass destruction. In 2007, the year before Barack Obama was elected or took office, the Intergovernmental Committee on Climate Change, or the International Panel on Climate Change Scientists, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize together with former unsuccessful rival to George W. Bush, Al Gore. Again, in an act that many interpreted as an expression of preference for one side of American politics rather than the rather distasteful Bush-Cheney regime that prevailed in the early 2000s. And in a way, the most controversial of the recent American presidents to win the prize in 2009, Barack Obama, was also, in a way, a snub to the Bush legacy. He won the Peace Prize before he had even been elected, or even before he had taken office as president. He had had no opportunity to make peace, to do, as Nobel's will said, to abolish or reduce standing armies, or establish and spread peace congresses. All he had done is run an audacious, hopeful election campaign. And Una Turrentini says in her book, the truth is that the Nobel Committee didn't care so much whether Obama deserved the prize or not. It was more focused on its message to the United States: get back in line, stop acting on your own and thinking you are anything special. Well, that message really had an impact, didn't it? The message did not work. Obama's Nobel Prize became a magic spell with which the prince who was promised, Barack Obama, mesmerized the world. He proved rather better at that and making speeches than securing peace. There, of course, have been many controversial choices. Perhaps Barack Obama's undeserving prize stimulated Donald Trump's envy, and it had become, by 2025, really quite an obsession. But his desire for the Nobel Prize was not a new thing. He overtly campaigned for the Peace Prize during his first term. By 2025, he'd clearly become somewhat sour and somewhat embittered about it. But let me tell you about two nominees for the prize who never did win the prize, who were infinitely more deserving, perhaps, than either Donald Trump or Barack Obama. One, of course, was Mahatma Gandhi, leader, among others, of India's independence in 1947, founder of the non-violence movement, inspired in some ways by writers like Lev Tolstoy, who also never won the Nobel Prize for Literature, despite him being the favourite every year from 1901 until his death in 1911. Gandhi, too, was nominated many times for the Peace Prize, and as Turrentini says, it's a staggering thought that Gandhi did not win the prize, considering bankers, environmentalists and warmongers have received the award, but the global face of non-violent resistance did not. Maybe because he did force Britain to quit India. Britain did, after all, jail him for it. And after 1945, even during the war, Norway, under a Quisling government, was allied with Germany, but after the war, Norway allied with Britain to make up for its sins and perhaps did not want to alienate the Anglo-American powers. In 1948, Gandhi was assassinated after the disorder of partition, and no prize was awarded that year, not even posthumously, and there have been posthumous Nobel Prizes. His death need not have disqualified him. The committee indeed later bent the rules for Dag Hammarskjöld in 1961, 13 years later. Maybe that too was a message to the Americans to get back in line. There are theories that the CIA may have played a role in the former UN Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld's accidental death. In 2006, indeed, the secretary of the Nobel Peace Prize, Lundestand, recognised that Gandhi's omission was the greatest in the Peace Prize's history. However, there is one other person who may well be considered for that status of the greatest omission, a person you may not have heard of. And I'm going to suggest that the UN Secretary General who succeeded the accidentally or deliberately killed Dag Hammarskjöld might be one of the greatest omissions in the Nobel Peace Prize history, especially when assessed against the Peace Prize's criteria: brotherhood of nations, reduction of standing armies, genuine peace congresses. That man was a Burmese diplomat, Pantanal U Thant, who served as Secretary General of the United Nations between 1961 and 1971. The crucial decade, really, of one of the crucial decades of decolonisation and the expansion of the United Nations and, changing politics in the world. He was a devout Buddhist and public servant, diplomat, and a true peacemaker. He was the first non-Scandinavian Secretary General of the United Nations, the first Asian Secretary General of the United Nations. I think Ban Ki-moon might have been the second. And he was a far more distinguished Secretary General of the United Nations than his European successor, Kurt Waldheim, who had a rather murky past during World War II involving SS squads in Croatia. And U Thant, his great achievement in peacemaking was that it was he who facilitated the negotiations that resolved the Cuban Missile Crisis, the great near miss of nuclear Armageddon. This Burmese diplomat was the key individual to do that. Now, it's not his boasting that says that. Indeed, it was acknowledged as such by the American politician Adlai Stevenson, who said to the to the US Foreign Relations Committee in 1963, and let me quote here, "At a critical moment when the nuclear powers seemed set on a collision course, the Secretary General's intervention led to the diversion of the Soviet ships headed for Cuba and interception by our Navy. This was the indispensable first step in the peaceful resolution of the Cuban crisis." So said Adlai Stevenson. But despite the fact that despite all the hero worship of JFK, it was this modest, Buddhist, low-key Burmese diplomat, professional diplomat and public servant, U Thant, who literally saved the world through his peacemaking. But he was not awarded the prize. The chairman, indeed, of the Nobel Peace Prize, the Norwegian chairman, intervened, refused to give it to the Burmese diplomat. One can only speculate geopolitics might have played a part, and gave it instead to the United Nations, to UNICEF, the Children's Fund. Surely a deserving prize, but perhaps they could have waited another year. After all, U Thant had just saved the world from nuclear Armageddon. U Thant was carried on a peacemaker despite the snub, despite the omission, and continued as Secretary General until 1971, not looking for plaudits, practicing genuine Buddhist detachment. He was far more deserving than Donald Trump, and he was a UN Secretary General of far more integrity than his successor, Kurt Waldheim. You can read his story in a recently published book, Peacemaker, U Thant, the United Nations and the Untold Story of the 1960s by Thant Myint U, his grandson. And indeed, there's a video interview with the author at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, which I'll include a link in the video description below. A few words on the 2025 winner. So the winner of the Nobel Prize in 2025 was not Donald Trump. It was María Corina Machado of Venezuela. She has been awarded the prize as a brave and committed champion of peace to a woman who keeps the flame of democracy burning amid a growing darkness. And she has been rewarded for her work promoting the democratic rights for people of Venezuela and her attempts to develop a just and peaceful transition, in the Nobel Committee's words, from dictatorship to democracy. She's been a leader of the opposition, democratic opposition within Venezuela. Now, of course, this is an interesting choice in rejecting Donald Trump. The Nobel Committee has yet given a wink to the American government's approach to Venezuela, but we'll look more at the specific. I will look more at the specific work that María Corina Machado does in a later post. But that's it. No Donald Trump winning the Nobel Prize this year. It is a Venezuelan woman, María Corina Machado, perhaps in some eyes a controversial choice, but it has been the tendency of the Nobel Committee in recent years to, I guess, reward democracy activists within the framework of the Norwegians Committee understanding of those terms. I don't know too much about María Corina Machado, but that is the news announcement. Now back to the rest of the video. Summing up, the overall message is that across the whole 125 odd years of its history, the Nobel Peace Prize has too often betrayed its original purpose. Not in every case, but in far too many cases. Secrets, corruption, and the pursuit of soft power or prestige for Norway, NATO, and the Nobel Committee itself have taken the prize, not the true peacemakers. Turretini, in her book Betraying the Nobel proposes several changes to the committee, including making the selection committee less political, fewer politicians or ex-politicians, and more committed and grounded in genuine peacemaking, to change the definition of peace rather than its extraordinarily broad humanitarian interpretation at the moment, and to make it a better reinterpreted version of Nobels and Bertha von Suttner's vision from the late 19th century. And finally, to implement a more transparent and open selection process, less open to the kind of campaigning and intimidation and who knows what other kind of inducements that Donald Trump has laid in the way of Norway over the last 12 months. In recent years, the Nobel Literature Prize has gone through some absolute terrible scandals in 1 year. A sixth scandal meant that the Nobel Literature Prize, I think it was 2017 or 2018, was not awarded that year. The committee was in such uproar, and it has since implemented changes to its process, its membership, and its culture, its approach. And many of the Nobel Literature Prize winners since that time have been far more deserving winners than people like Bob Dylan or Winston Churchill. So surely it is time for Norway to do as the Swedish Academy has done and restore the integrity and the world's trust in the Nobel Peace Prize. It's time to reform the Nobel Peace Prize. Thanks for watching.